Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to another Dominions 5 Nation analysis courtesy of my Patreons. We are getting towards the end of the month of August, and while it has been pretty bloody hectic on my end, given my line of work and the COVID outbreak, I'm still have forced myself to make time for what is one of the more complicated nation requests. There's been a little bit of a delay in getting this one ready because I've been trying to get my head around the monkey nations, because the requests this month in terms of guides, the two remaining ones, are for Patala and for Lanka, both of which use this monkey-based roster and are quite technical. So, disclaimer first before we get into the structure of the video. I'm not a Monkey Nation player. I played against the Monkey Nations quite successfully, but so I'm familiar being on the other side of the coin of some of the things Monkey Nations can do to you and how you have to deal with it. Specifically, I have played against Patala twice, in fact, but I am not a Patala / Bandar log / Kailasa / Lanka veteran. I am not a Monkey Nation veteran, and there are a number of players in the Dominions community who really specialize in getting the most out of these monkey rosters. So, what I'm giving you today are my impressions of the roster and my thoughts derived from playing against them. They have quite complex rosters, they're very involved, so keep in mind that I'm speaking from that position of maybe a little bit more limited experience than I would have if we were speaking about nations that were closer to my base of expertise. Structure, as always, we're going to do lore, which is going to be a little bit out of order because we're starting with the late age, but hey, if it's a patron request, it gets to jump the queue. We're then going to talk about the units, the mages, we're going to talk about the summons, because there is an awful lot of them, and then some of the big choices that you have to make playing Patala in terms of noting what playstyles they enable, but the really big choices you need to make as to who you are going to be as a nation before you really even get started. And that's about whether you are going to try and become Blood Patala, or whether you're going to play just Patala straight and use it for the nation that it is. So, let's start with lore first and foremost. Let's go Pretenders of the World, Patala, here we are. So the story of Patala is the culmination of the Monkey Nation line. This is set in what we got to think of as the Dominion's equivalent, probably of the Indian subcontinent, where you've got this vast territory that is populated not primarily by humans, but by various races of monkeys. And you've got a number of subspecies that we'll go over. You've got the Mercator, you've got the Atavi, you've got the Vanara, which are, I believe, similar species but different caste. The Bandar, who are your gorillas, essentially. And there are specialized monkeys in some areas called, like, white ones, the holy ones, that are somewhat represented in the mage caste. Those are sort of different classes of monkeys. In the early age, this civilization is ruled over loosely by the Yakshas, semi-divine beings. This is when it's in the Kailasa era. They eventually disappear, and the Bandar form the leadership of a society, hence the name Bandar log. So in the Middle Age, you have the Bandar being a dominant species, although the white ones are still dominant as sacreds, as mages, etc. It seems, however, the monkeys can never really catch a break, because in every age except for Middle Age Bandar log, whether you're talking about Kailasa, whether you're talking about Lanka, or whether you're talking about Patala, something else comes along and rules the damn monkeys. They cannot seem to hold on to leadership of themselves. And in the late age, that is the Naga. So Naga are divine beings of the underworld. They have come onto the realm, and they are the top level of society. The Naga kings and queens, they rule at the top. Beneath them are the Bandar, who rule the military and control most of society. At the absolute bottom, you've got the Mercator, who are pretty dumb and simplistic in their thinking, if you go by what is written here. And in the middle, you have the Vanara apes. So they're the human-sized ones. The size 2s, they sit in the middle of this sort of social hierarchy. So the Nagas have come in, they've taken over. As is the late age nation, we don't know how this story would end if not for the player intervention. So all we know is that the Nagas have come along, seized control of the society, and they have thrown their lot in with the Awakening God. they have decided to rally the nation, and it is because of the decision of the Nagas that the monkeys of various species will follow. So, you are a heat preference nation. This is a nation which thrives in sort of that hot, humid Indian subcontinent sort of climate. So, you start with a preference for heat 2, which means you can get a free point going up to heat 3. You are a nation with an interesting combination of species and paths, which gives you quite a few options, but also some quite obvious weaknesses and gaps in your roster. In that, while it is diverse, in many ways, it's not great, especially for the era that you now find yourself in. One of the problems that Patala has, and I'll say this out up front before getting into this troop roster, there's not much evolution in the military of the ape nations leading in to the late era, or at least their evolution is far outmatched by the evolution that the human nations, or that others, and in particular that independents undergo from early to middle and middle to late. You're still using the same basic tools. Mercator are what they always were. Bandar are still fundamentally what they always were. And elephants, again, are basically what they always were in terms of concept and basic equipment. So let's go through the unit list first, because they all serve very different purposes. Mercator come in two varieties. This is the basic Mercator. So a Mercator is a little size 1 monkey, a little cute little size 1 monkey, who has, as a result, 14 defense, because small units tend to have very high defense. They're extremely cheap, 5 gold, 1 resources, 3 recruitment points. Now, Mercator have two problems. They're undisciplined, and they have horrible magic resistance morale. They have low hit points, but you expect that for 5 gold. So 0 prot, 5 hit points, basically no magic resistance and morale. They are animals, and this is a trait that we'll talk about once we finish the units, because it covers almost all of the units that you will have as this nation. They have forest survival, and they have undisciplined. They have 2 attacks, an 8 damage club, and they have this thing, sticks and stones. Sticks and stones is like a 2 damage attack with a tiny little range, because the range is based on strength. So you've got range 5, so point blank range only. It has 2 attacks, so you throw 2 damage blunt attacks. This is pretty bloody useless unless those sticks and stones happen to be on fire, in which case this is one of the cheapest ways to proc flaming arrows. However, because you're getting 2 shots per 5 gold, but you're doing it at range 5. So, yeah, good luck. The other option is you can get a Nakada Archer. Nakada Archers, again, are undisciplined, but they have bows, and because they have bows, they won't rush forward. They'll shoot. And 7 pierce damage is not nothing. The problem is, by the time you get to the late age, pretty much everything has armor now. 7 pierce doesn't have the utility it once did, but they are still super cheap, relatively high defense units. They can still take flaming arrows. The range is much, much longer, 35 compared to the 4 or whatever it was on sticks and stones. So Mercator have 2 basic roles. They catch lances because they are high defense and they're really cheap. So if you're going to put something in the way of an enemy lance charge, it should be a Mercator. Or if you happen to have the ability to put flaming arrows on them, the archers are perfectly functional. Let's move on to the Atavi and Venara, which is the size 2 lineup. So the Atavi Archer is a 7 gold, it's super cheap, 7 gold, stealthy short bow. Short bows, this is a much more quality bow when you think about it than the Mercator, because you're actually getting twice as many hit points, but you still have very little protection, very little magic resistance, very little morale, and even less defense. So it's not a fantastic unit, but hey, it is stealthy. The problem is, in general, short bows, a non-flaming arrow short bow is not a particularly useful weapon in the late era. Not against independents, and not against just about any nation you're playing against. Niche. Atavi Infantry, still at the cheap category, so we're still looking at 7 gold, we're still stealthy, we still only have 8 magic resistance and 8 morale, but we're still very, very cheap. Now we've got a 16 damage mace, and we've got 12 defense, and we still have the sticks and stone attack. So, not bad at this point. If for chaffy purposes, essentially. It's chaff that might occasionally hurt something, right? It's got 16 blunt damage. It might eventually hurt something. That's your infantryman, and both of these are stealthy, so you can send them out. The problem is, unless they're in large numbers, it's going to be hard to massacre PD with these guys, but it can be done. Vanara are not stealthy, but they gain a bit of protection. This is it's a caste differential. It's the same species, but they're a different caste. So the Bandar have a similar sort of caste system. You pay a little bit more gold and a lot more resources. You get a morale point, and you go from like 1 protection to 14 protection. So there's really this choice here over whether or not you want to protect your archers or not. Plus, you get the extra point. If you have spare resources and you're making archers, it is a better archer than the Atavi archer. The trade-off there being stealth. The Shakram thrower, I don't get the Shakram thrower, if I'm perfectly honest. You get 12 pierce damage on that dagger. You get 16 damage on this mace. So I guess the idea here is that the Shakram is secondary. This is basically an infantryman with a javelin, but because he has a javelin, he doesn't have a shield. If you compare to a Vanara infantryman with a shield, what you're losing here is 2 defense points, essentially. So you're trading 2 defense for a 14 slashing damage javelin. Up to you whether you think this trade-off is worth it. Normally, in early eras, I always go with the javelins, but by this point, the omnipresence of higher armor, I'm not so sure. Also, the purpose of these infantrymen, I tend to believe that they're probably line holders more than they are intended to be killing troops, so I'm not so sure about the Shakram. The swordsman, you now get to above human cost. You're paying 11 gold, 17 resources, 13 recruitment points. So we've come a long way. We're up to 10 morale, which isn't great, but it's okay. 11 attack, 12 defense, and we do 18 slashing now. So we're starting to do a little more damage on a size 2 moderate quality chassis. These are thoroughly average infantry, and by the late age, they're not that. They're subpar. This magic resistance is a huge problem, and it's one that's going to keep popping up as we continue going. Low magic resistance animals. Light Bandar Archers. So now we're in the Bandar category. Bandar are size 3s, and they have the sort of characteristics you'd expect of size 3s. Lots of hit points relative to their... hit points in line with or above their cost. And then very high damage attacks coupled with vulnerability because skills and attack density. So the Light Bandar Archer has a longbow, 14 pierce at range 45. In earlier eras, that was really respectable. Now there's a big question mark over it. It comes down to what you're fighting. But there are a lot of things in the late age that really won't care about longbows anymore. There's a lot of shields, there's a lot of protection out there. Think about the sort of gear that a lot of the human nations are rocking in late age. Think about what the late age Agarthans are coming out with. Longbows aren't enough. They can defend themselves to an extent in close combat because they've got this 21 damage mace, but they still have low MR. Their skills are poor. Attack 11, defense 9 on a size 3 chassis is poor. They will get murdered, and they won't do a huge amount of murdering in return, but they exist. Bandar Archer is the same thing, but you pay a bunch of resources in order to basically armor the thing. And at 15 protection, that's a huge bloody difference. Something with 15 protection is going to survive a heck of a lot longer than something with 2. So if you have the resources and you want the longbows for some reason, remember that they exist. You then have a number of melee infantry. And to me, if I think of a guerrilla, melee is what they're here for. And there are some, if not gems, at least there's some quality and roles that you can find in these units. 2 of them stand out to me. The first is the big Bandar Warrior. Bandar Warrior with an iron cudgel. That's because 26 blunt damage on a 15 protection chassis is actually pretty promising for 16 gold. In the sense that there's a lot of targets out there where 26 blunt delivered in sufficient quantities, is enough to get through the protection and deal with expensive opponents who you might not otherwise have a solution to. If you don't have a magic solution yet, hitting it really, really hard is something a lot of nations want to be able to do. And the Bandar Warrior with that cudgel can. And if you manage to crack a headshot, and you will crack headshots sometimes with an iron cudgel, that blunt multiplier for head damage is going to deliver results for you. What that means is not only will your damage high enough that you might chip through high protection. That blunt characteristic means that in the occasional case where you hit the head, plus how lethal head hits can be, if something is really expensive and relying on never getting hit, eventually you're going to crack that head hit and cause some serious damage. And at 15 prot, 18 hit points, it's going to take a couple of hits. You'll take those hits because you're at 8 defense skill, but you'll take a couple of hits before you go down. You might smack them with the cudgel and do some damage. The Bandar Warrior, I'm not a huge fan of, so you lose a lot of damage. You lose 5 damage over the big Bandar. You're paying the same resource cost, same recruitment, same gold, and all you're losing 5 damage in exchange for gaining, I think, 2 defense. And that 2 defense is represented by this buckler. So I pass on the Bandar Warrior. I would rather have the 26 damage. This thing is going to kill in fewer hits, and that's better than 2 extra defense points in my view. Then there's a light Bandar Warrior. Now, the light Bandar Warrior's got a lot to say about him by comparison to the others. Now, it's 10 protection, but it's much cheaper, so you'll get more, especially earlier in the game. So you can get a decent number of these guys out. You're still at that, you've got 10 defense, 11 attack, and that 21 damage mace, so you're similar to that other Bandar Warrior. But unlike that other Bandar Warrior, you've still got sticks and stones. But your sticks and stones, because you're a strong mofo, because you're a bloody gorilla, and can bench press like 700 kilos or something, your sticks and stones do 12 blunt, and you still throw 2 of them at once at range 15. Suddenly, that's pretty good. If they were on fire too, it'd be even better, but 12 damage, a 12 damage double javelin that's thrown at range 15. You might crack some glamours. You might hit some stuff. Like there are units against which those sticks and stones can be really useful to break up a formation before you move in. A lot of things out there completely ignore. But that's not when you want to deploy the light Bandar, right? If something is rocking 20 protection and a tower shield, you're going to bring the big cudgels. You're not going to bring these guys. But if you're fighting something where that combination of the twin shot, high ammunition javelin, plus having a really good mace and decent combat stats, plus you've got good morale, Bandar have better morale than humans, it's not bad. Well, actually, all these troops are worse than what I would expect for the price in the late age. Let's not mince words. I don't like the monkey roster in the late age overall, but there are things that this roster can do. You've got lance catchers, you've got cheap bows, and then you've got some really hard-hitting mainliners. Then you've got specialized units, 2 sacreds and an elephant. Elephants are... If you have an elephant in your roster, it's almost something worth noting in and of itself. And elephant mancing, expanding with elephants, is a really sort of niche, not a niche skill, but it's definitely a skill that is practiced, judging how to squadron your elephants, where to position them, what you can and cannot deal with. But an elephant does mean that even though it's not going to be cheap, you can expand. As far as elephants go, this is far from the best elephant in Dominions 5, and the fact that it appears in the late age makes it a little bit worse, but you've got it. It's cheap on resources for what it is. 20 resources and 33 rec points, but 100 gold gets you a 64 hit point, 11 protection, so it's not nothing. 11 protection is the basic, I think, natural protection of the elephant, yeah. But it's only MR6 Morale 9. So they will run, And when they run, they can trample your own stuff if you're not good at handling elephants. And 6 magic resistance means other players will eat these things alive if they have anything in their repertoire that is MR negates. And if they have charm animal, it's going to look at this big magic resistance 6 sack of HP and go, that is mine now. And an elephant swapping sides in the middle of your formation is going to make you real sad. So you've got to be careful with elephants. They're good at the very start of the game if you want to expand with them. There are multiple ways to expand with this nation. One of them is elephant expansion. So that option is available to you. Then they probably need to phase out. There are times where if you can surprise someone with elephants, or if they don't have the counters at hand, you can wreck face with them. Body ethereal elephants with protection buffs suddenly get very dangerous. Flying ethereal elephants, incredibly dangerous. Elephants respond very well to point buffing, and you're a nation that can point buff pretty well. You've kind of got a little bit of Uruk in you in that sense. So if you want to point buff elephants to catch someone off guard, the elephant is here for you. You then have the Naga. People like to shit on the Naga, and to an extent it's for good reason. This is your Naga. So there are 2 versions, by the way. One is capital only, strictly, which is the Naga Warrior. The other is capital and caves, which may as well be capital only a lot of the time. There aren't many caves on maps, but if you play with one of the map generators that actually creates a reasonable number of caves, you could mass more of these. The Naga is 20 gold, 2 resources, and 17 rec points. This is a pretty cheap sacred. It's got 16 hit points, so it's got cheap hit points per gold for a sacred. They're size 3, like your Bandar. They have very limited protection, 13 magic resistance, 11 morale. They've got thoroughly average statistics at 10 attack and 11 defense. And are thoroughly unimpressive in most senses. However, they've got a couple of things that should keep in mind and make them niche. But let's just put it out there. This ain't no van here. Like, this is not a Tiger Rider. This is not a van here. This is not a Sacred Cavalryman. This is not a super elite gonna win a war, Sacred Rush someone sacred. That's not what this is. But it's an amphibian who is poison resistant and has Spirit Sight. It has a spear. It has range 0 fangs with a strong poison. It has a range 10 poison spit attack, which does 12 poison. And it has this hypnotize attack. So this is I'm pretty sure this is a length 5. Yeah, this is a length 5. So melee, it's a melee weapon, which is a magic resistant negate stun single target. Affected by penetration bonus. So there you are. You take away from the opponent's test if you happen to be using arcane finesse for whatever reason. So there's some things here that make this not useless, even though it's not great. The first is, this is a way that you can, your Naga, particularly the Naga Warrior. In fact, let's show the Naga Warrior first, and then talk about when they might be useful. The Naga Warrior, you pay 7 more gold and more resources, but all of a sudden you have 16 protection, which is suddenly respectable. You get even more hit points. You have a 21 damage falchion, which is quite a lot of damage. You keep the hypnotize, the venomous fangs, and the poison spit. So, first and foremost, there is a lake near your capital, and you're on a map which has a lake. Congratulations, you don't need to thug the lake. Thugging water is not always super easy. I've seen it go horribly wrong, both in my own games and some of the other ones that I have watched. Having some quality amphibious units that can go down and mess things up, all good. There's some niche combos there in terms of using the Spirit Sight or in the poison resistance, and they're sacred. So if you want to do foul vapory sort of play, having a poison resistant unit in your roster that can guard the mages while they do so, it's there. Against targets that are not particularly magic resistant but are big and expensive. So if you've got a target profile where that hypnotize is really going to come into its own, that's there. They're not great. No one's getting out of bed and saying that you're going to build a build around the Naga. I guess someone could. Someone could do anything in Dominions. It can be off meta and it might catch everyone off guard. But they are painfully slow. They're capital only. They're not tremendous for what you pay for them. But there they are. it's not trash. It's not trash. It's just not great. But 21 damage plus venomous fangs plus a poison spit plus a hypnotize, and you got some nice little like miscellaneous bonuses, including amphibious capability. All right, all right. Overall, however, the troop roster is, well, it suffers a little compared to, if as we do more late age nations, this will become apparent. But let's put it this way: this is not late age Atlantis. This is not most of the late age human nations. This is not. These aren't the best of the best. The monkeys turned up for war, and they may have sent their best, but they are certainly not the best the Dominion's universe has to offer. But they've got some appeal. They've got some specialized units. You can kind of make it work, but you're going to be fighting an uphill battle if it's just a straight troop conflict, resource for resource. Let's talk about mages, because there's some serious redeeming stuff up here. Mercator Scout is a really cheap scout. 20 gold. 20 gold, 1 resource, 1 rec point. You can, yeah. If you need to fort recruit scouts, then saving the few extra gold, cool. Leaders. Vanara Captain is a thoroughly average 60 leadership, 35 gold commander. The Atavi Chieftain looks worse, and he is worse. He's 40 gold for only 40 leadership. The difference is he's stealthy if you want to lead stealthy parties. The Atavi is where it's at. The Bandar Commander, you pay more. You pay 75 gold and a bunch of resources to get 80 leadership in case you want to put people in formations and have the squad morale bonus. And given the morale bonus of most of your lighter troops, you really would. Even with morale 12, probably handy. Then let's talk mages, because mages is, if there's going to be a redeeming feature of Patala, it's going to be the mages, and there is some redemption to be found here. Brahmin, 45 gold, Holy One Priest, pretty basic, super cheap level 1 priest, has reincarnation. So reincarnation is a thing that triggers when you die, and it can turn you into a range of things. The most common one I've seen is a reincarnated dying unit turning into Dominion candles. This is quite a complicated mechanic, and I'm not going to go into it in detail. I might re-explore it if I do the other 2 mainline monkey nations, because I won't have to spend all the time going over the units again, so I can maybe dive deeper into the reincarnation mechanic. But other than that, just a really basic bog standard priest. The Yogi looks really basic, but is also bloody exciting. Yogi is a good mage, okay? So a Yogi is a 2 rec point, 55 gold, sacred S1. There's a saying that I've heard before, that a true engineer knows they've achieved perfection, not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. And the Yogi gets pretty close to that maxim. You're not paying for unnecessary protection, you're not paying for unnecessary hit points, you're not paying resources for armor you don't need. You're paying 55 gold and then half upkeeping, so you're getting a super efficient lab rat, and you're getting S1. And S1 by itself is a super efficient path, because these are some of the best magic duelers in the game, and if need be, there's some of the best sacrificial communion batteries in the game. There are better in that latter term, but there are very few better mind duelers in the game than Yogi. So, Yogi mean most of your forts will be running pretty cheap. You'll want lots and lots of mages, because this is a super cost-efficient mage. It's not a fast researching mage, but with Magic 3, it's 55 gold for 10 research points, and then you're only paying an upkeep of 22 gold per year. Super great. And if the enemy comes at you and they're relying on astral, and a lot of stuff in the late age relies on astral. This is an era with a lot of, well, there is a decent amount of astral, and there's a decent amount of astral in mixed path, multi-path, expensive mages in the late era. And the Yogi just roll up, scream their battle cry at the top of their lungs, or maybe they just hum om, and then they flip that coin for death or glory. And sometimes both. So I really like the Yogi. They give you efficient research, they give you communion chaff, they give you magic duelers. Yeah, praise them very, very highly. Then you have Guru. Guru Guru I have a problem with because they only have 10 map moves, so they slow you down. But anyway, 15 magic resistance, 13 morale, 160 gold sacred, so half upkeep, still got the reincarnation. So now you've got Astral 2, N1. So you know that you're going to have big Astral and big N in your communions. Having a little bit of N in your communion, of course, means that you can pop the personal regen, which will help keep some of the slaves alive if you're hitting them pretty heavy. So what that means is if you have a battery of a whole bunch of Yogi and you hit them with personal regen, they can support like the small communions where you've got like multiple Yogi and one, maybe two masters, buffing them up so you can get big Astral and big Nature cast. So it's all right. With the communion boost, it'll do its casting, but really, it's going to need communioning to do much at all. Also, S1, you can do some fluffing with S1, by the way, and they're cheap and disposable enough that you don't worry about it, and having low hit points means that retreating them, in both these cases, the low hit point means that retreating them after fluffing something is unlikely to cause HP rout. Then you've got the Nagas. They've got 3 categories of capital-only Naga, and then a cave-only one. Let's dismiss the cave-only one first. It's 55 gold for a sacred 40 leadership leader. Like, super basic. Why does this exist? It exists because you want to lead Naga Warriors underwater, and you found a cave, and you don't want to waste cap turns recruiting the good stuff. That's pretty much why this exists. Also, so you can recruit Nagas that you recruited in those caves, so you can give them leaders. I guess that's why that exists. Never seen these deployed in any numbers. Nagarajas, Naginis, and Nagarishi. These are all summons from earlier eras, I believe. I know at least the Nagarishi is, and I think the Nagaraja is too, but now they are here, it is the late age, and they are recruitable. So let's have a look. Nagaraja, these are the Naga Kings. 175 gold, 35 resources, because that gets them 16 protection, so they're pretty survivable. 17 MR, 14 morale, 80 leadership, so they're decent generals. So these are decent generals, they're decent morale, they're inspiring to an extent because they've got 80, so that's +1. Then they've got all the Naga traits, so the Hypnotize, the Falchion, the Bite, the Poison Spit, but you don't really want them in combat. They're unsurroundable and they have Spirit Sight. Great, they're poison resistant. They've got the Water Nature cross path, so a little bit of boosting. We're going to talk about Foul Vapors, aren't we? And they've got Earth 1. So the thing here is we're paying for Priest 2 when we probably only want Priest 1. So we could probably make a saving there. But other than that, like, okay, if we check our research for a moment, we go to Enchantment, we go to Enchantment 5. Foul Vapors, you need to go to N3. Water 1, we are at what? Yeah, okay. So we're going to need to get our nature up in that case, and we're not communionable. So Nagaraja going to have a little bit of a problem with that, but instantly that cross path screams for it. These are decent mage leaders. They're just a tad expensive. You can cast some stuff with this, and you can certainly boost your water from there. So you can get water higher than that. The Nagini you pay even more. You lose that extra holy path that I said we didn't really need, and in exchange we gain the random, and the random here is kind of critical. The Nagini with E2 is our E2, and Nagini with N2 is our N2 as a nation. The Nagini with Astral is the Astral Master to get water and earth into our communions. And Water 3 means we've actually got like Water 5, like we're all the way up there. So all of these randoms are useful for unlocking something. If only you didn't pay this much for it, it would be better. But as it stands, they're a little underprotected, but they will either be a way to guarantee you can get earth and water into your communions. That's one role they serve. Or they'll be the ones who make your Thistle Maces. They'll be the ones who cast Foul Vapors if you want to go that way. They'll be the ones who, with E2, they're going to be the ones who start your Earth Forging. Your problem with that, though, is that they don't have feet, so you're not going to be able to get Earth Boots on them. So you're not going to be able to get to that magic E3, which is a little unfortunate for them. But you've got some options at E2. And then Nagarishi, you can just recruit these straight out. The problem here is those roles that I was describing before. Sorry, the Nagarishi does all of those roles just out of the box. The problem is you're now at 4 rec points and 390 gold. So while it can fill any of the roles that each of the random previous mage could of the Nagini, so it can do each of the individual Nagini roles, but you're paying a premium for it, right? So it always has astral. So it also can be the way you get water or earth into your communions. But you're paying for that on top of the other paths, right? So you've got water 3, earth 3, astral 1, nature 1, and then you've got randoms. Water, earth, astral, nature. So what does this mean? It means that you've got the crystal cross path built into your nation. So that's a nice starter. You're going to have access to crystal gear with a little bit of finessing. You've just got it straight out of the box. So you can forge those matrices, but you could also do that with a 1/1 Nagini. You've got the Earth 3 straight out. So you've got a hammer creator, which is handy. And this is all the water you'll ever need. Again, you lack feet, so you're going to struggle to get beyond E3, but E3 is good enough. E3 in a communion basically means all the big earth magic is available to you. Water 3, Astral 1 means all the water battlefield magic is available to you. So you're doing okay in a lot of respects. The problem is, as I said, you're paying for it. Also, with all the Naga sort of classes, while they're going to do fine in your heat scales, I'm not thrilled about cold-blooded in general. If you move into fight cold nations, that cold-blooded is going to fatigue you really, really quickly. But the Nagarishi is a relatively powerful mage that does a couple of key tasks. It's just bloody expensive for what it is. I think that about wraps it up. Now, so overall, this roster has some good things, but it's certainly not enough to get excited about. You have to mentally remind yourself to compare to other nations, and most of its competitors in the late age, you look at this roster and go, it's not superb. It's probably not even like busting above the average. The top level mages are not impressive enough for their price and their limited availability. The researcher is really good, and there's a lot that's unlocked by having a cheap S1 kamikaze available to you in all your labs. But the unit lineup is uninspired. Let's use the word uninspired, and we'll struggle to expand other than through elephants, or will be higher attrition in expanding than other nations, which means that you're either going to end year 0 with an army that is including a lot of elephants that are less useful against players, or smaller and more attrited than other nations, and thus be vulnerable. So there are problems here. What Patala and all the monkey nations do have going for them is a really extensive summons list. But it is the nature of those summons that forces you to make some hard decisions. So let's go talk about those summons now. Okay, so here are all of Patala's national spells. There's a lot of them. Let's go through in order. Herd of Elephants, N2, super accessible, Conjuration 3, 25 gems, gets you 5 plus scaling elephants. These elephants are basically pretty much, they're almost as good as your elephants, let's put it that way, which is kind of sad. So if you want a lot of elephant tramplers in a hurry, there, but 25 nature gems is a lot. Like this is a pretty big investment, but it comes early. You're spending 25 gems to get, think of it as 25 gems gets you 500 gold worth of elephant. We'll put Apsaras here as let's just rule out the ones that I think we can rule out as boring first. Are there any others? Yes, Ambush of Tigers and Herd of Buffaloes. These are pretty standard. Ambush of Tigers, Conjuration 3, Herd of Buffaloes, Conjuration 3. This gets you 5 Buffalo, who are size 4 tramplers, and otherwise, in a lot of ways, better than elephants because they're berserkers. But they're only size 4, so they do less trample damage. Herd of Buffaloes is available to you, and you can get 10 times Tigers. Tigers have 21 hit points. They have decent morale, 2 attacks, dark vision, but they have low prot. So you invest 1 gem per tiger. This depends what you're fighting, right? If it's really low protection, a lot of attack skill 13 double attacks might help you if you just dump an extra 50 tigers into an army or whatever, using some N2s that you have put together or that you have thistle maces or whatever. But again, these are all emergency spells. They're not long-term investments. The sacred lineup, the summonable sacred lineup, come in, I'd like to think of it as, you'll probably say 4 categories. There's the death summons, there's the blood summons, the astral summons, and then there's the nature summons. So let's do the nature summons first. And they're also some of the really early ones, and these are the ones that you will have access to as Patala. There's Contact Yakshini and Contact Yaksha. These are both commanders. So, Yakshini, for 25 nature gems. So instead of getting 5 elephants, we can get Yakshini. Yakshini were recruitable in EA Kailasa. This is a Water 3, N1, Sacred 1, and a random Water, Earth, Astral, Nature, Sacred Yakshini commander. I'm not thrilled, if I'm honest. Like, they have ore, but in order to thug something like this, you need to put protection on it. You need to give it quite a bunch of gear, quite a bit of gear. I've seen people do this. I have seen people thug Yaksha and Yakshini. I can't remember if it was a Yaksha or a Yakshini. To me, the Earth Path for self-buffing, pretty good, but you could also do some Moss Body stuff over here. Both of these chassis are held back, and they both cost about the same, by the way. You use the Earth Cross Path to hire the one that's higher in Earth, use the Water Cross Path to hire the one that's stronger in Water, and you get reasonably powerful mages. Now, the one thing I'll say about the Yaksha is, one, it comes at Conjuration 4, and it means that with your Earth 1 cross path, you can get an Earth 3 who can wear shoes and thus be Earth 4. So if you need to get to Earth 4, the Yaksha can do it. If the Yaksha rolls the Earth random, this can actually get you to Earth 5, which unlocks a bunch. So the Yaksha is there. You can thug these things depending on what your bless is in particular. They're not fantastic, but they come early and they're definitely within your reach. You will have nature gems and you will have these paths. Then there's all the astrals. How much astral you have depends on what's on your god, but you have at least some astral as a nation. So let's do the astral ones in order. That's too much for me. First one, Gandavas. Okay, which ones are these? Here we are. 6, 12, 18. So 3 pearls per gets you an 18 protection or standard sacred. Now, that's pretty expensive for a unit, but at 13 attack, 13 defense, 16 magic resistance, morale, I just wish it had a magic weapon. I really do, for fighting like Lemurians and the like. Or also doesn't help against them, but hey, they are standards, so they will boost the morale of your units. And they come at Conjuration 5. And Conjuration 5 is something you want to go to as a lot of nations anyway, because Conjuration 5 is just a great breakpoint level for the path, and you'll always have Astral too, so you'll always be able to summon them. You might be tempted to save your pearls for better and more expensive things, but they are here, and they're interesting. Canaras Conjuration 6, so we've gone one step up here. We now spend 25 pearls, but we get air magic on a fast flying chassis, air astral to be precise, which means this thing wires into a communion, which means you have all the air battlefield magic you could ever want right here in the Canara. And all it takes is getting to Astral 3. So already you're seeing the role summons play in broadening out the options that Patala has available to them. And it's not like it's going to get Magic Jewel, right? Because you're going to have a million yogis with it. It's mobile, it can Cloud Trapeze, it can Communion, it's sacred, so it's going to take whatever your bless is, and if you've got a Mage Bless, it's going to accept that just fine. So, Canara, good. Very glad I have it in the roster. Thank you very much for your super accessible spell, which turns Pearls, which I have, and Astral 3, which I'm going to have, into Air Magic, which I didn't have. Conjuration 7, so we're getting pretty high now. Cedar. So the Cedar costs 35 pearls and Astral 4, and in exchange you get Air 2, Astral 3. And you have to ask yourself, is it really worth the extra investment to get those extra astral paths on a unit? And the one thing I'll say to that is you get a little more survivability, you get the extra astral paths, but the other thing you get is, in terms of utility, it's a teleporter. This unit has infinite map move. So it can still teleport and cloud trapeze as normal, but when it's making conventional move actions, it can move to any square on the map at once. Ignore the 102 map move. That's actually infinite. Just like morale 50 is just representing a certain immunity to morale. So if that mobility is valuable to you, then you might want to spend the extra gems. If you're just looking for battlefield casters, you'd probably rather have more Canara that are easier to get and cheaper than fewer Cedar. Plus, you have to go to Conjuration 7. And if you're going to Conjuration 7, maybe you're going to Conjuration 8. And now we're talking Devata. So Devata, again, keeping up with this theme of using Astral to get us high air. Now we're at a chassis whose problem is that it's still got relatively low hit points, but it comes with decent stats, high base protection, 28 hit points, a full array of weapons, and 4 arms, which means if you want to kit it with some shields, it can certainly carry them. You can go 2 shields, double weapon on this if you want to. Air 3, Astral 2, and Holy 3. So you've got a Throne Claimer available to you right here, and one that can cloud trapeze. So super mobile Throne Claimer. 45 Astral Pearls, pretty expensive for what you're getting, but what you are getting is kind of cool. That's the theme of a lot of the summons. Devala. I know the units, but not the names. Okay, so the Devala. You're at Conjuration 9 now. So the Devala and the Rudra sit in Conjuration 9, which is, let's be frank, not a level most people ever go to unless they're going like full Tart path. If you're not going Tartarians, most people never go Conjuration 9. But if you do go Conjuration 9, Astral 5 gets you, for the price 55 pearls for either of these. You get your male-female options. The female option gives you Astral 3, Holy 4 on or for inspirational, etc. Look, I don't find that particularly inspiring. But, there it is. You've already got high enough Astral to summon this thing, so you've already got an Astral 3 base, probably. So you're not summoning this to get higher Astral. And Holy 4, you can just wire your Holy 3s. I guess getting Sacred Communions is a little more complicated for you, but, yeah, look, I'm not thrilled. The Rudra is different. The Rudra has a significant series of points to it. For one, it introduces the fire path. Secondly, it introduces the death path. Thirdly, it introduces the air-death cross path. Fourthly, it's got a whole bunch of cool things about its survivability. It carries an apotropaic weapon. This is the anti-demon weapon by default. Times 2 damage v demon. It's got a plague blow, it's got lightning, it's resistant to fire, it's resistant to shock, it has storm power, it has built-in fear, it's got ambidextrous and a lot of arms, which means shields, buff, protection, it's got a lot of eyes, it's got fantastic stats, well, not fantastic, but good, 15, 14 is good, lots of magic rares, lots of morale, 32 hit points is pretty good, 18 base protection, and like I said, it's going to give you this death air cross path, so you're suddenly in Wailing Winds, Wind of Death territory. Fire Death is also good. That's the Bane fire path, which can be good. It's your pathway into fire magic if you want to call Research 9 a pathway. So if you do go Conj 9, remember the Rudra exists. And maybe get 1 or 2 for diversity and to surprise people with paths that they didn't know you had. But probably more efficient to just get these paths on, say, a pretender or whatever, and break yourself into death that way. Speaking of death, there's only 2 death summons here, and they're not easy for you to do, but here they are. You can summon Vettlers at Conjuration 5 and Garners at Conjuration 2. These are Garners. They're little ghostly monkeys. So these are ethereal, 0 protection monkeys. You get basically, they're a little more than half a gem each. Considering that we are in the era where Lemuria is shitting its ghosts out everywhere, a lot of people are going to have ghost counters. A lot of people are ready for ghosts. And if they are, they're ready for a lot more ghosts than you're going to produce through your host of Garners, especially since your Death Gem income is not going to be great. So I would rule out Garners in most cases. Similarly, the Vettlers, so these are possessed corpses of Bandar. Look, they hit hard, but and they get a life drain attack and madness and whatever once you wound them. So they go a little bit nuts. So yeah, the second form is also ethereal, so they're pretty survivable, I guess. And they do get their bodies back if they die. So these guys are a lot more survivable. They're 1 gem each. I don't know. I mean, look, hear me out here. Death gems are super valuable. They're super valuable for your own death magic. So if you've got some death magic and you're summoning these guys, you've got a little bit of death. They're super valuable for breaking into death. They're super valuable for getting the death summons, the generic death summons, breaking into immortals eventually. If nothing else, they're extremely valuable in trade to a lot of nations. So you've got to really think, am I getting the best value out of my gems by making a bunch of possessed corpses? And I think the answer is usually going to be no. Then the big one. Here's the real question. All of the monkey nations have access to a variety of blood summons. Only Lanka has easy access to them, but all of them do have access to them. Except for, I think, Kailasa. Kailasa is ruled out of most of them because they're opposed to Lanka. But past that point, everyone else can get in on the action. And as we go through this, you'll see there's some stuff here to be interested in. The problem is there is no built-in way for you to easily do this. There's a way, but there's no easy built-in way. First Blood 1, for 3 saves apiece, you can get Rakshasas. Rakshasas are basically naked Lankan demon ogres. You would need a good bless to make the Rakshasas like a good idea. And especially since Blood 1 mages are in such short supply, I tend to rule them out for you. But hey, if you want to use Blood to make Sacred Troops, you can. I just think you've got such better options. At Blood 2, Pragasas. Pragasas are, again, these are a type of naked demon ogre, so you've got 4 protection. You've gone from 2 attacks to 1, but it's a heavier one. It's a mace. I won't talk much about the demon ogres because they're really a subject to cover with Lanka. But again, this is not something that is in your wheelhouse if you're Patala. It's not why you would go Blood. Asrapas. So Asrapas are better, but still pretty sacreds. So they're Berserker and they have a life drain attack, which can help keep them alive. The problem is the low protection. So even with their life drain, they might get torn through. But this is a much better deal for those 3 slaves each than you were paying originally for your Rakshasas. Rakshasa Warriors. So now people have heard my critique of the Rakshasa and they've decided to give them armor and a cudgel. So this is basically a sacred version of your Bandar who's going around cudgeling people to death. He's got a lot of hit points, he's kind of tough, he's got chaos power, so if you went in that direction, he might get a bit of a boost. Doesn't need to eat, but he eats a bunch anyway because he's a dick. But you're paying for the privilege. It's 5 slaves per unit. So again, unless you've gone unit bless, there's better things for you to do with your time. And we'll get to better things to do with your time in a second. Sandyabalas. Sandyabala is another sort of like combatant demon ogre. Now we're talking about 10 slaves per. And what you're really paying for here is this Moonblade, which is a magic weapon which does ×2v magic. This is something you normally forge. It's a genuine Moonblade, carrying by Sandyabalas. They have dark power as well as chaos power, so in darkness they can get pretty brutal. But again, you're not really going to be in this domain often, and Death Blood, ugh. Now we start getting into stuff that's going to tempt you. Here's your Dakini. So, Dakinis are really good. Dakinis cost 81 slaves, admittedly. They cost blood 4, air 1, which is a difficult thing to summon, but you can do it. But it also means that they can make more of themselves, because they come with blood 3, and with a booster they'll be blood 4, and they have air, so they can make more of themselves. But a lot about this unit is great. It's got good stats, it's super mobile, it's sacred, it flies, it has spirit sight, it's got the death air cross path, it's got the air cross path for boosting, it's blood 3, which makes it a really, that's a good level of blood. It has fear 6, a strong fear aura, so if it can buff itself or it has gear to keep itself alive, then it's going to be in good shape, and it can keep itself alive even with less gear than you normally think, because it's got the Athame, which gives it life drain. So this is a very serviceable thug right here. We're getting close to the same level, not at the same level, close to the same level where we'd start to get Vampire Lords. So it's in that sort of company. But the Dakini stays here because it's interesting. Blood 7, not so interesting. This is the commander version of the Sandyabala. The interesting point here is that this is an assassin. Do you want to pay 35 gems for a non-magical assassin? Probably not, most of the time, to be honest. But with that Moonblade and a Dust Dagger, there are specific targets that it might hit. I just generally think that the low combat speed means that most mages that it's going to assassinate are going to blap him with some sort of magic, right? They're going to summon something, they're going to chaff him, they're going to make bugs, they're going to make elementals, they're going to hit him with a lightning strike. He's got resist fire 10, so it's a fire mage. They're going to combust his ass. I pass on the summon Ishada, even if I'm Lunker. And then you have the big boys. The biggest boy, of course, is the Mandeha. Mandeha is a size 5, 65 hit point demon, essentially, a huge Rakshasa demon whose standout trait, as well as the fact that it's sacred, increases unrest, it's got high level death magic, so it's D3, blood 2, air 3, sacred 3, is that it auto-casts darkness at the beginning of a battle. So this is much more of a Lunker thing than a Patala thing. If you've got a bunch of darkness using units, the Mandeha gives you darkness built in start of the battle. Not really a Patala thing. Patala's interested in the Dakini, I think. And then Danavas. Danavas are big, scary, sacred, size 6 units. 92 hit points, lots of unholy weapons, average-ish stats, lots of magic rares, lots of morale. Now, if we turn advanced on, I believe we'll do it. There we go. And we put the Dakini, the Danava, and then what we really want to add here is... Who is it? Is it the Asrapa? There we are. There we are. These are the ones you might be interested in as Patala. Asrapas are units, but if given Gift of Reason, which is admittedly quite an expensive process, you're paying 20 or 25 gems, depending on whether you're using the Astral or Nature version, it's high research too, gives you a Blood Hunter. Blood 1. Blood 1, Holy 1. Hidden Magic Path. So, you can expensively force your way into a small blood economy that way. The other option is your god, who is going to have blood if you want to go blood anyway. You're going to have put blood on your god, is give your god the paths to summon actual bloody blood hunters, and then only go into blood once you've got a little bit of research up. So do Vamp Lords or do Dakini or something like that, like summon the actual leaders and go that way. The other thing to note is the Danava has some possible paths if you make it a commander. It can have blood, it can have air, it can have up to 2 in each. So on a size 6 chassis, maybe you want to invest in that, maybe you don't. It's not a lot of magic paths for a lot of investment, but I just thought I'd note it. The Dakini and the generic blood summons are really where you want to spend your stuff. Here is the fundamental problem, and we'll go back to Dominions itself for this discussion. There is nothing in your base roster that lets you go blood. So if you want to go blood, it needs to be on your god, and it needs to be something that you're accepting a significant trade-off to do. There are good things about doing it. Giving you Dakini or Vamp Lords or whatever gives you a late game plan. Both of them can hunt their way and then produce more of themselves and get you into that like atomic progression. But it's slow. It's a late game plan, and it means building your god around it, because your god's going to have to be the one that blood hunts, and it's going to have the right cross paths. Death if you want Vamp Lords, or the right paths if you want to go for Dakini instead. Or you're going to have to sacrifice a lot of conventional gems to break in using Asrapas. So it's a big trade-off. A lot of people advise it. Me, I'm not so sure. I'm going to advance it as one of the couple of ways you can go. What can you do as Patala? Which way should you consider going now that we've had a look at the roster? Well, let's think about this. Our weakness is that our army is not great for the era that we find ourselves in. Our strength is that we have a really efficient research option, and we've got some good summons that sort of break us out and allow us to do decent communions which cover a variety of paths. You need to gauge your playstyle, but let me just raise a few ideas with you. There's which problem playing Patala do you as a player most worry about and want to solve? If you're most worried about getting rushed in the early game, Patala should consider options that help it ward off enemies in the early game. That to me means either you're getting like an awake expander or something that also helps you offset the problem that you have, especially if you're not confident with elephant expansion, and that lets you move into more of a monkey army. So awake, scales, and whatever. The weakness, of course, there is your awake monster probably doesn't have the paths to be your late game summoner. Another counter rush option, but one that doesn't give you expansion assistance, is you can go with a Dormant Titan. A Dormant Titan with the right paths in order to do a couple of targeted diversity summons, just a couple of targeted ones, probably not that expensive, and might be enough to turn the tide of an early battle, or at least ward off an early game rush. So if you're scared, if you want to balance the late game and early game rush, Dormant Titan is an option. If you want to go blood, you're now talking about stuff like Dormant Fountains or Dormant Rainbows. Ones that can appear, start hunting pretty early, and then have the paths to like get you into that one after you get to that point. I think investing in blood comes at a pretty great cost. There's some scales you want as this nation. You get one free pickup. You get one free pickup for going to Heat 3, but you only get 1 point on that. And you want to go Magic 3. You want to get the 1, 2, 3 magic points, because that's what makes the most of your mages. And you want growth. So there's going to be some expense here. You don't need super high Dominion because you're not going to be spamming your sacreds. And you can probably afford to go Sloth and or Turmoil, because you don't need to be spamming high resource units. You have low resource options. In the early game, you expand with your elephants, and later on you can use things like light Bandar Warriors. Turmoil, because recruitment points are not particularly prized to you. And if you go luck, you can balance this out. I should talk about the heroes. But let me finish this thought first. So my point is, there's a lot of to capture the strength of Patala. You want magic scales to make the most of your researches, and then you want something that's going to let you access enough of your summons or other summons to get diversity and options in the late game to leverage the fact you've got good national summons and that you'll have good research. And you want to be able to actually cast the bloody spells that you have researched, hence the diversity of summons. However, you also have a lot of weaknesses to cover. Expansion is a weakness, an early war is a weakness, diversity to an extent is a weakness, and it's going to be hard for you to find a god that covers all of those at once, that gives you the scales to capture on your strengths, and that gives you diversity, and that gives you expansion, and that wards off the enemy. So you're going to have to pick your priorities from those. In this test game, this is a dormant blood access build that I tested. It's like a 26 province expand, elephant based. but there's a lot of other options that I tested and they work. The problem is, will they test under fire? Now, when I fought Patala, to an extent they were painful because they had Magic Jewel and I was astral reliant with much more expensive mages. But at the end of the day, I was late age Atlantis and I had my ice troops, and as long as I froze the territory before moving in, that was game, set, and match. They could do things like foul vapors, so I needed to have counters to that. But they've got weaknesses in their troop line and whatnot. I would say once you've decided how to cover your weaknesses as Patala and where you want to emphasize, then you turn your thinking to which nations surround you and against whom could you get a good counter. That might be foul vapors. It might be a rush with point buffed elephants, just to throw some batshit crazy idea out there. It could be any sort of communion build that leverages astral and nature magic to their fullest extent. So it could be Howl if you're going conjuration. So it could be Howl, could be foul vapors, could be mass prot. That's a bit further down the chain. Howl is probably more likely against a lot of targets early on, plus it's on your conjuration path. Then you can start throwing in like air battlefield magic and whatnot from your summons in small amounts too, supporting it with your communions. Earth obviously gives you a lot of army buffs early. There's evocation options. There's a lot you can do if you can keep yourself alive and unlock it. I'll talk about the heroes now because otherwise I was going to forget them, and then I'll give some parting thoughts, because Patala, rather than giving specific god designs, I just want to go through those maxims and those thoughts and give my final sort of roundup. Okay, we're back. Now, disclaimer. I don't believe Patala has any non-worthy heroes. Certainly they're not displaying in the modern Spectre for me, and I've never seen any in combat. They've got a decent number of worthy heroes, but this analysis is going to very much differ based on whether you have worthy heroes in your game or not, like massively. Because, among other things, in worthy heroes give you a whole bunch of diversity to break into stuff, which you no longer need to invest in on your god if you don't want to, particularly if you're going full luck scales. And indeed, in a Worthy Heroes game, I would, instead of building my god for a certain late game access, I would probably go luck 3. But let's go through them. The Fallen, Devasura, does not have a turn arrival limit on her. She is a Fallen Devata, and all you care about here is the fact that it is a Blood 3 hero. Straight out. So, not so great for summoning your diverse blood summons, but you could always empower, but you got a Hunter straight off. That's a blood income, that's a way to break in. Karidata, the Ancient Ape, also does this. Blood 1 for hunting, but also just a passive blood slave generation as well. Again, this is the blood income and the blood summoning that you need to break into these paths. So instantly this transforms your options if you get them reasonably enough. There is no turn arrival limit. So it's basically RNG. Now, that is a risk if you want it to be part of your plans, but it also means it doesn't have to be. I wouldn't rely on it, but it's something that can surprise you, because luck delivers other value as well as just to the heroes, right? Here's your Death 2, just a Death 2 mage. Do I care that this thing is an assassin or whatever? Probably not. I care that it's a Death 2 mage. Congratulations, I have a Death 2 mage. I'll put a stick on it. I have Death 3. Haha, I now have Death access on my nation. Whoopee. That is a big win. Balabita, the Golden Naga. Now, this is much more of a sort of soft super combatant sort of thing, because you've got 100 hit points on a size 5 chassis, very easy to enlarge it to size 6 so you can't be trampled. It's got built-in aura, it resists fire and poison naturally. You could probably make it resist the other things. It's sacred, so it's going to get access to whatever is in your bless. Key here is fire access. So fire, astral nature, this gets you fire into your communions, and it does it using a hero. And again, I do not believe there's any turn arrival limit on this, so fantastic. And then finally, Valmiki. Valmiki shape changes. There's the immobile version. The immobile version has Astral 4, instantly your highest Astral, can wear a cap, can forge and hold a coin, that gets you to Astral 6, can make another ring, that gets you to Astral 7, can make another ring, which it's out of miss slots for at that point, but who cares? This is all the Astral you will ever need on a stationary Inspiring Researcher. If you choose to move, you lose Inspiring Researcher, but you become mobile. Oh, wait, hold on. There we are. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood this for a moment. So, in the immobile state, so the non-shape change state, you're an Inspiring Researcher, but all your magic paths are suppressed. Screw that, and screw the Dominion spread. Get the path access, if you need it. If you've already got all the paths, then sure, keep him as an Inspiring Researcher in his static position, sure. But if you need the Astral 4 for whatever reason, wake him up, and get him to make stuff. So there you go. Worthy Heroes gives you options and significantly changes the way that you play. I will pivot back to the game now because there's some closing thoughts I want to give on this nation, just to expand out the weaknesses and whatnot a little bit more in order to warn you a little bit more for what you might be in for. And I say warn, but this is a very characterful nation. I'd like to play the monkeys eventually. They're very characterful. They're definitely part of the Dominion's lore. And I smile every time I see them in a game, but I also wonder if I want to go kill them. In the early game, the weakness in your troop roster weakens you a little bit. In the mid-game, your communions are a real strength, and you get a bit of a power boost. In the late game, your troops are even more obsoleted than normal for a couple of reasons. The biggest one is that they are animals with magic resistance 8. So every sort of charm animal or mass charm spell out there is going to find these guys, and just like Ormish troops, everything Ormish troops are vulnerable to, these guys are vulnerable to too. Mind Burn, Soul Slays. We think of middle-aged Orm troops as being punished. Bandar are punished way more. You can put anti-magic up easier than Orm can, but that still only gets you to MR12. And there's a lot of mass check animal enslaves, animal charms that are not MR easy negates, they're just MR negates, or they have wide areas, or they're more accessible than normal. And you'll just find your troops being shredded by MR negates or animal charmed or whatever. You've got pretty dodgy morale in some of your units, and the stuff that has good morale has low magic resistance and is otherwise vulnerable. So if I was to say the importance of having a plan as this nation means you need to plan a late game that is going to be mage reliant in a big way. Your big mage balls are also eventually going to be in big trouble. Yogi have 9 hit points. Guru have 9 hit points. They are super soft, squishy, and vulnerable to the Murdering Winters and the Flames from the Skies and everything that does mass damage to a province. These guys are vulnerable to. They're vulnerable to battlefield wipes that are cast. They can limit that somewhat with things like etherealism, but getting them to resist everything that might be battlefield wiping them before that thing battlefield wipes them is difficult. They're vulnerable to an awful lot. So in the late game, your communions are going to fall off. The Nagas are going to be able to survive. At 22 hit points, they're going to be able to survive, but they'll no longer be able to truck around their communion slaves. So if you are going to thrive in the late game, you need to be able to transition into something. And that something might be lots of your summon commanders. It might be conventional big death summons if you've gone that way. Almost any nation can force their way there with a god. It might be going big elemental royalty down conjuration, really getting diverse and using a bunch of conjuration summons. It might be going blood and saying, I am going to make Dakini. It is not efficient, but I am going to be Dakini as if I was Lanka, and everyone else is going to have to deal with it. But what I would say is, in designing your nation, if you were to solve only two problems, and benefit one strength, I would pick the following 3 if I was playing Patala. Pick something that is going to help me survive my first war. pick something that gives me a late game option, and get magic scales somehow. Sack prod, sack turmoil if you have to. Go to heat 3 and get yourself at least a bit of magic, some growth. And if you're playing worthy heroes, consider what you can beg, borrow, and steal in order to buy yourself some luck, because those heroes will really make all the difference. I've really enjoyed covering Patala. It's a long video, they're a complex nation, and I think as I cover more of the monkey nations and have the time in the video to go more into the concepts of how you use monkey troops and monkey gods in greater detail, because I kind of had to introduce it all at once with Patala, you'll get somewhere. Personally, I think Patala is... Look, they're probably hanging in below average in my view. I've never found them particularly challenging to fight. Admittedly, I've only fought them twice, and once was with the really powerful Late Age Atlantis. Things like the Magic Jewel are hard to deal with for certain nations, and Foul Vapors is always annoying. But there are other nations that do those things as well, that do not have the weaknesses around the troop roster or whatnot. A little bit of amphibiousness is good, but I honestly think you're hampered by the squishiness of the mages in the late game, the weakness of your troops in the very early and very late game, and the need for a god to get some diversity, or for heroes to get some diversity or options on the table for you later. Fantastic summoned roster, but you need to be able to get there, and that requires a little bit of investment, and a lot of nations with good summon rosters don't require the same level of investment in order to make it happen, both in terms of searching for the gems and then making it happen. The one exception there is the astral summons. You'll have lots of astral pearls and you can get diversity through the astral, so the astral summons should be a given. But if you want to go into the other ones, particularly the blood summons here, you really have to invest if you want to get there. So those are my views on Patala. Apologies that I don't have perhaps as much to add as I do to other nations, but I hope this can at least stimulate some discussion. I'd love to hear from some of the more experienced monkey players out there. Thank you again to those of you who support me on Patreon. I really appreciate it, especially during these times. And I'll be back relatively soon covering Lanka.